Imagine waking up one morning just like any other day, heading to work, caring for your family, planning for the future. But by sundown, everything changes. Your legal status, the very foundation of your life in America, is gone. Everything you built, suddenly at risk of unraveling. This isn't a script for a dystopian novel or a political thriller. This is the new, harsh reality for over 500,000 migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, known as the CHNV group, living and working across the United States. How did we get here? And what happens when the law itself becomes a moving target, with real human lives hanging in the balance? Today, we unravel the story behind one of the largest and most controversial reversals in recent U.S. immigration history, a Supreme Court ruling that has left over 500,000 people who entered the country legally, suddenly facing the threat of deportation. The stakes are enormous, not just for the migrants at the heart of the story, but for the economic, legal, and moral fabric of America itself. To understand how such sweeping upheaval became possible, we need to take a closer look at the tangled web of U.S. immigration policy, political posturing, and humanitarian promises. The U.S. has long struggled to balance three conflicting priorities: national security, economic needs, and humanitarian responsibility. Over the last decade, events in Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, countries racked by dictatorship, economic collapse, environmental disaster, and mass violence, sent shockwaves of migration rippling toward American borders. By late 2022, border crossings had reached historic highs, and the Biden administration faced mounting pressure to demonstrate both compassion and control. Their solution, the CHNV parole program. This was designed as a pragmatic, tightly managed pipeline for up to 30,000 migrants per month from those four countries. Applicants had to meet strict eligibility criteria, pass background checks, secure a U.S.-based financial sponsor, and agree to enter through pre-approved ports of entry. No border running, no secret midnight arrivals. For many, the program offered not just escape from peril, but hope for a legitimate future. More than 500,000 people seized the chance, following all the rules, trusting the system. They became part of the U.S. workforce, paid taxes, enrolled their kids in school, and started small businesses. Just in Florida, 175,000 Venezuelan migrants with temporary protected status quickly transformed into a vital political constituency, courted by both parties. But beneath the surface, the seeds of conflict were already taking root. The Trump administration, returning to power, had built its brand on tough-as-nails immigration control. Officials argued that programs like CHNV not only strained U.S. resources and incentivized further migration, but also undermined border security. They painted a picture of chaos, backlogged courts, overwhelmed shelters, and communities beset by uncertainty. Legal scholars countered that the parole program was a lawful, carefully constructed tool, one that had been used by presidents of both parties in response to crises abroad. It's particularly troubling that the administration is targeting immigrants who were invited into the U.S. and entered legally, said J. Kevin Appleby, a senior policy fellow at the Center for Migration Studies. He added, "If this program served immigrants from Norway or Sweden, the administration would not be seeking to terminate it." As the debate raged on cable news and on Capitol Hill, the legal battlefield simmered. The Trump administration moved to terminate the CHNV parole program in March 2025, giving migrants just 30 days to leave the country. A federal judge temporarily blocked the move, insisting that every case deserved an individual review. But the government appealed, and the case rocketed up the judicial ladder to the highest court in the land. And then, on May 30th, the Supreme Court delivered its bombshell. In a 5-4 split decision, it allowed the administration to end deportation protections immediately, even while challenges worked their way through the lower courts. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in a fiery dissent, accused the court of allowing devastating consequences of allowing the government to precipitously upend the lives and livelihoods of nearly 500,000 non-citizens while their legal claims are pending. "Success takes time," she wrote, "and the stay standards require more than anticipated victory." Her words echoed across immigrant communities, legal circles, and faith organizations. Suddenly, people who had legal status yesterday were thrust into legal limbo. This is for a group of people who had lawful status until this morning, but who the Trump administration has forcibly rendered undocumented overnight, said Karen Tumlin of the Justice Action Center. Behind the headlines, the human cost was staggering. Picture a Haitian nurse working night shifts at a Miami hospital, a Nicaraguan engineer helping rebuild storm-damaged homes in Houston, or a Cuban entrepreneur running a bakery that anchors a struggling neighborhood in Tampa. Each story, each family, now faced with impossible choices: pack up and leave, with nowhere safe to return to, or go underground and risk arrest at any moment. For many, the initial response was disbelief, then panic. The Department of Homeland Security offered a $1,000 stipend and a plane ticket to those willing to depart voluntarily. It was a cold comfort for people who had sold everything to come here, bought into the American promise, and followed every rule. The ruling sets a dangerous precedent by allowing the Trump administration to dismantle long-standing humanitarian protections for people fleeing persecution and abuse, warned Ida Sawyer of Human Rights Watch. From a policy perspective, the consequences were immediate. Over 75,000 CHNV parolees had already filed asylum applications, adding to the crushing backlog in immigration courts. Many more scrambled to submit paperwork before the deadline, hoping to stave off deportation or buy time for another legal reprieve. But for the rest, the future looked grim. The DHS announced it would prioritize removing those who hadn't filed for asylum, temporary protected status, or green card adjustment, a tiered system of vulnerability that left thousands exposed. Advocates and legislators called for urgent action. These migrants entered the United States legally, relying on promises made by the Biden administration. "I urge the administration to grant deferred enforcement departure," pleaded U.S. Representative Maria Elvira Salazar. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security's system was already buckling under the strain. Immigration courts were flooded with new cases, local governments struggled to provide basic services and legal aid, and employers worried about losing essential workers overnight. Economic analysts warned of ripple effects: lost productivity, disrupted businesses, and heightened instability in industries from agriculture and construction to healthcare and hospitality. Ethical questions loomed large. Was it just or even practical to punish people for trusting in legal processes established by the government? This is the largest single action stripping any group of non-citizens of immigration status in modern U.S. history, declared Ahilan Arulanantham, a professor at UC Irvine School of Law. For critics, it was more than a policy debate. It was a fundamental test of America's commitment to fairness, due process, and humanitarian values. Defenders of the termination pointed to immigration enforcement as a duty of the state. Stephen Miller, a senior Trump advisor, responded sharply: "The Biden administration can fly in 500,000 illegal aliens, and we're having a conversation about, oh, maybe they should get to stay for life." The question for them was about law and order, national security, and the need to deter further waves of migration. But amid the ideological crossfire, the practical realities were becoming harder to ignore. The Supreme Court's decision had set the stage for a series of cascading crises, not only for the migrants themselves, but for the entire system tasked with absorbing, adjudicating, or expelling them. Humanitarian organizations braced for increased demand, already stretched by global instability and economic uncertainty. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops characterized the move as counterproductive and urged the administration to weigh the suffering caused by such abrupt change. J. Kevin Appleby summed up the broader sense of unease. They also come from countries with oppressive regimes and could be targeted for persecution when they are returned. It shows some hypocrisy as the administration labels immigrants as criminals, but still deports those who play by the rules. Even within the machinery of government, there were doubts. Judge Indira Talwani's earlier ruling had called for measured case-by-case review, a principle sacrificed for the expediency of mass terminations. Solicitor General John Sauer argued that the courts should defer to the executive branch, framing the issue as a constitutional struggle over separation of powers. But for thousands of families, the abstract became heartbreakingly concrete. The clock was ticking. In town halls, church basements, and law offices from Miami to Los Angeles, families faced midnight deadlines, uncertain legal status, and mounting fear. Would the courts intervene again? Could Congress act? Or would an entire generation be forced into the shadows or back into danger because of a single Supreme Court decision? What comes next could reshape not only the lives of these migrants, but the very landscape of American politics, economics, and the rule of law. As the first shock waves ripple outward, a pressing question remains. Will America's institutions rise to meet this humanitarian and legal crisis with integrity and innovation? Or will they falter, leaving the most vulnerable to pay the highest price? Now, as the Supreme Court's decision sends a chilling wave of uncertainty through over 500,000 CHNV migrants, the entire U.S. landscape braces for a new chapter, one that could reshape not just individual lives, but entire communities, economies, and the moral foundation of American immigration itself. So, what's next? The fallout from this legal earthquake is only beginning. In the coming months, experts anticipate a massive surge in asylum applications. Already, over 75,000 CHNV parolees have hurriedly filed paperwork, hoping to secure at least a temporary lifeline. Immigration courts, already backlogged and underfunded, now face a potential tsunami of new cases. Some legal analysts warn that it could take years to process them all, leaving tens of thousands in a painful limbo, unable to legally work, afraid to seek medical care, and living in constant fear of a knock at the door. But the consequences do not stop with the legal system. Communities that welcomed CHNV migrants in good faith, offering jobs, housing, and support, now struggle with the prospect of sudden labor shortages, broken families, and a humanitarian crisis at the local level. Consider Miami's Little Havana. Here, Venezuelan and Cuban newcomers have revitalized neighborhoods, opened businesses, and filled vital roles in the service sector and healthcare. Local business associations warn that losing even a fraction of this workforce could cripple the city's economic rebound. One restaurateur, Maricela Toro, summed it up poignantly. They came here with hope, they built lives. Now, overnight, everything is in jeopardy. Families are grappling with fear too. Many CHNV migrants have children who are U.S. citizens, spouses who are legal residents, and deep ties to their new communities. The looming threat of deportation doesn't just affect individuals, it tears at the fabric of entire families. One expert, Guerline Joseph of Haitian Bridge Alliance, calls it a generational trauma that will ripple for decades. And if these migrants do face deportation, the challenges grow even more daunting. Many return to countries still racked by violence, political repression, and economic collapse. Human rights advocates fear that the U.S. could end up sending people back to face persecution or even death, in direct violation of international humanitarian norms. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is scrambling for ways to avoid mass detentions and forced removals. The Department of Homeland Security has already begun offering a $1,000 cash stipend and free plane ticket to any CHNV migrant who agrees to leave voluntarily through the CBP Home program. Critics see this as a desperate measure, one that does little to address the moral and legal crisis at hand. And for those migrants who choose to stay and fight, the odds are stacked against them. The Supreme Court's ruling has stripped away many legal defenses, making it far more difficult to halt or delay deportation proceedings. Advocates warn that this could embolden future administrations to dismantle other humanitarian programs, with little regard for due process or long-term consequences. Yet the consequences are not merely personal or local. On the broader stage, this decision could set new precedents for U.S. immigration law and executive power. Ida Sawyer of Human Rights Watch cautions that the ruling sets a dangerous precedent by allowing the administration to dismantle long-standing humanitarian protections for people fleeing persecution and abuse. It's also fueling fresh diplomatic tensions with countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, nations already hostile to U.S. influence. Forced returns could be interpreted as a cold abandonment, undermining America's global image as a haven for the persecuted and the oppressed. Now we must look at how the American political system might respond. As immigration becomes a central campaign issue, both Democrats and Republicans are already jockeying for position. The sizable Venezuelan community in Florida, numbering over 175,000 just among TPS recipients, wields growing political clout. Will candidates seek to win them over with promises of reinstating protections? Or will the debate only harden partisan lines further? There's also the looming specter of future legal battles. While the Supreme Court has allowed protections to end for now, the underlying appeals are still working through the lower courts. Judge Indira Talwani's earlier ruling, requiring case-by-case review for termination, could eventually be upheld, forcing the administration to slow or reverse mass deportations. But for now, every new legal filing feels like a race against the clock. International organizations, too, are stepping into the breach. The UN Refugee Agency, Catholic Charities, and dozens of grassroots nonprofits are ramping up legal aid, humanitarian support, and advocacy. Some are even calling on Congress to intervene, suggesting new legislation granting deferred enforcement departure or permanent status for the most vulnerable. But in today's polarized climate, swift action in Washington seems unlikely. Amid all this turmoil, there may be unexpected opportunities for change. The crisis is prompting a new national conversation about the values that underpin American immigration policy. Advocates hope that the chaos and suffering witnessed now can push legislators and the public toward a more just, transparent, and compassionate system. So what does this all mean for you, the viewer? First, it's a lesson in the enormous impact that court decisions and government policy can have on real lives. Immigration law is not just a distant issue for politicians and lawyers. Its ripples reach into schools, workplaces, hospitals, and neighborhoods across the country. If you live in a city with a large migrant population, you might notice rising anxiety, changes in the local job market, or increased demand for social services. Employers relying on CHNV workers may face disruptions. Schools may see the sudden loss of students. At a minimum, we're likely to see a new wave of community activism as lawyers, churches, and ordinary people scramble to support their neighbors. It's also a powerful reminder of how fragile legal status can be, even for those who followed every rule and trusted the promises of the world's most powerful democracy. As Karen Tumlin of the Justice Action Center put it, this is for a group of people who had lawful status until this morning, but who the administration has forcibly rendered undocumented overnight. For those interested in advocacy, this moment is ripe for engagement. Seek out local organizations supporting migrants, whether through legal aid, housing, or simply offering a sympathetic ear. Writing to your representatives, attending city meetings, or even sharing reliable information on social media can help stem the tide of misinformation and panic that always follows policy shocks. If you're a legal professional, know that your expertise is desperately needed. The immigration courts need pro bono help more than ever. Even for those outside the legal field, volunteering or donating to trusted organizations can make a tangible difference. For families with CHNV members, the practical advice couldn't be clearer. Consult an attorney as soon as possible. Deadlines for filing asylum, TPS, or other forms of relief are now a matter of days or weeks, not months. Paperwork errors or missed hearings could tip the balance between safety and deportation. For the broader public, this crisis reveals just how quickly humanitarian protections can be unraveled and how important it is to hold leaders accountable for their promises. But there's also a deeper takeaway. This is a test of American values. The U.S. has long balanced enforcement with compassion, security with opportunity. The way this crisis plays out will tell us much about the country's moral compass in the years to come. So where do we go from here? Is there hope for a solution, or will confusion and fear only deepen? Despite the uncertainty, some glimmers of hope remain. Legal advocates continue to fight in the courts, aiming to restore at least interim protections or win new forms of status for CHNV migrants. Congress, under pressure from religious leaders, local governments, and business groups, could be nudged to pass targeted relief, though that path is far from guaranteed. Across the country, ordinary people are stepping up. In border cities and far-flung suburbs alike, neighbors are banding together to offer food, shelter, and support. Churches, synagogues, and mosques are opening their doors, reminding us that, whatever the law may say, the bonds of human solidarity can outlast any ruling. And here's a secret fact the headlines missed. In the days after the Supreme Court decision, a quiet surge in mixed-status legal clinics occurred nationwide, with lawyers and volunteers working around the clock to help migrants explore every available option. It's a grassroots legal movement, mostly invisible, that could yet tip the balance for thousands. One client, one family, one appeal at a time. In the end, the story of the CHNV migrants and the American communities who welcomed them remains unwritten. The Supreme Court's decision has torn up the script, but it's up to all of us to shape what comes next. So, what do you think? Should humanitarian protections be permanent, or must immigration policy always adapt to changing times? How far should the U.S. go in balancing national security and mercy? If this issue matters to you, don't just watch, get involved. Share this video, talk about it with friends and family, and if you're able, support organizations offering help on the front lines. Change starts with awareness, but it only succeeds through action. Thank you for watching. For more stories, insights,